Welcome, innovators, business owners, entrepreneurs, technology experts, academia, government R&D communities, and other members of the North Carolina innovation ecosystem. This is Defense Technology Talks, hosted by the North Carolina Defense Technology Transition Office, or NC DEFTECH. In this podcast, we will showcase various technologies with local and national experts who aim to solve complex national security problems. In the coming weeks, we will highlight North Carolinians with the potential to, or those that have positively contributed to enhancing the capabilities of our warfighters, law enforcement, and first responders. We will also feature government leaders in research and development who have helped shape the future in this domain. These podcasts are just one of the many free services provided by the North Carolina government to assist the North Carolina innovation ecosystem to thrive and provide solutions for our nation.
Mallory Coleman. I'm in Morgantown, West Virginia, here at the Civil Military Innovation Institute headquarters. Just real quick background about me. I was in the West Virginia National Guard for 7 years, just separated this last fall. My background ranges from aviation management to public affairs to some cyber intelligence background as well. I was briefly stationed at Fort Meade for about 2 years at Joint Force Headquarters, Department of Defense Information Networks under Cyber Command. Then came back to West Virginia in early 2020. Within the West Virginia National Guard, there's an entity called the Army Interagency Training and Education Center, which hosts a variety of different mission assurance, critical infrastructure protection teams within the West Virginia National Guard. There's various stakeholders of those teams to include Headquarters Department of the Army, DHS, DISA, Defense Information Systems Agency, among others. I was part of the DISA mission assurance team for about a year and a half until I separated last fall, came to CMI2 in the spring, and I've been here ever since. My role here at CMI2 with the Catalyst Pathfinder Program, which we'll talk about here in a minute, it's called the Pathfinder Warfighter Innovation Chief. So in essence, my job is to act as a liaison between Army Guard units, taking in problem sets from soldiers, and then turning to academia and industry to create solutions for those problems to then integrate back into DoD. So I am one of two PWICs, as we abbreviate it, for the West Virginia region and the West Virginia National Guard. My counterpart, who's online this morning, I think he's been hopping on and off. I think he's had some technological issues. David Jordan, he's the PWIC for the North Carolina region. And we also have PWICs at Fort Stewart, Fort Campbell, and in Montana with the Montana National Guard. So that's just real quick background about me. And today, like Denny had said, we're going to be talking about the Catalyst Pathfinder Program, which is part of DEVCOM, Army Research Laboratory. Next slide, please. So yeah, we'll be talking about the program focus and the mission today, kind of going over what the objectives are for Pathfinder, what success looks like for us within this program. And innovation, the DoD innovation ecosystem, that's a big thing within this program that we focus on. And again, creating solutions for soldier-inspired problem sets. So, we'll talk about this program, what that looks like, and the various ways that we help to solve those problems. The restructuring of Army Futures Command, or the creation of Army Futures Command, has been the biggest restructuring in the Army since Vietnam, from my understanding. When it comes to innovation in the Army and in DoD, an example I'd like to bring up frequently is the Joint Tactical Radio System Debacle. So about 10 to 12 years ago, there was a problem that was brought to a DoD laboratory to create a robust radio network system that could be taken out into the field and used by soldiers, something that was rugged and could withstand weather conditions, stuff of that nature. There was quite a bit of time, several years, and I believe it was within the ballpark of $5 to $6 billion spent on this project, just curating, creating a prototype. The one key element, though, that was missing from this project was the fact that there was very little soldier input. This was just something that was created by folks in a lab, researchers, stuff of that nature, folks that may have never deployed or had any military experience. So the first time this radio system was taken out to the field, it melted. No one seemed to account for the fact that when folks deploy in, 130-degree weather conditions, there needs to be something that can withstand the heat of, some of those deployed locations. So that's where Pathfinder is a little bit different. This program was started it kicked off about a year and a half ago now, under DEVCOM Army Research Labs, CMI2, Civil Military Innovation Institute. We're the prime contractor for that program. And the primary focus is to go to the units, to the E3s, E4s at these Army units, whether it's active duty or National Guard, take in these soldier problem sets, conduct the due diligence and the research to see if there's solutions that exist for these problems. And if there's not, we then turn to our pool of academia and industry experts and partners to, create an RFP, send them to possible performers, have them come back with a proposal for a solution concept, sign on to that with a task order in order to kick off that project and create a solution concept within a finite amount of time to then integrate back into DoD, into the Army, back into the soldiers' hands, solving that problem. So the full name of this program is Catalyst Pathfinder. I will say there is a company that is subcontracted to CMI2 on this program. It's called Acme General. So the Catalyst portion of Catalyst Pathfinder is for the soldier problem intake software that Acme General created. There is, let me see if I can dig out a business card. We have business cards, posters, and different flyers that have these QR codes on them. My screen's blurring out a little bit. What happens is we'll pass out our business cards, posters, flyers, stuff of that nature. There you go. Thanks, Denny. That's from last week whenever we met him for the first time. So what soldiers can go ahead and scan that QR code, and what it'll do is it'll redirect them to the Catalyst portal. So if a soldier has a problem in their unit that they observe when they're doing training, when they're out in the field, when they're TDY, when they're at a drill weekend, if they're a guardsman, they can scan that QR code, it redirects them to the website. They can describe the problem. They can provide what they see as the solution concept for that problem, any other background info that would be helpful, what unit they're a part of, their contact information so we can follow up with them. And when they submit that problem statement, that, problem information, what happens then is it goes into a database within the Catalyst software. And each of the warfighter innovation chiefs in West Virginia, Fort Campbell, Fort Bragg, Fort Stewart, and Montana, we all have logins where we check that on a daily basis to see what kind of problem statements have been submitted. And if that's something that we can take, curate, conduct the research and due diligence to see if there's solutions that exist or if this is, something that's just remained unsolved. And then take that problem set, turn to academia and industry to see what kind of solutions can be created to solve the problem. So that's the Catalyst element, is that software piece. And then Pathfinder, once we get the problem and we curate it, then we use that program to move that information to the academic and industry partners to create a solution. So, like I said, this program kicked off about a year and a half ago. We have standing MOUs, MOAs with the entities listed at the top there. 18th Airborne Corps at Fort Bragg. That's David's area down in North Carolina with the 82nd. And then the 101st also falls under that entity. We also have agreements with the 160th out of Fort Campbell, 3rd ID out of Fort Stewart, the West Virginia National Guard out of West Virginia, and then the Montana National Guard as well. So that's some of the Army entities that we work with. And then in terms of academia, I know in West Virginia, we frequently work with WVU and Marshall. David, I see that you hop back online. I don't know if you have the ability to unmute or not, but do you want to speak a little bit about who you work with down in North Carolina and maybe some of the things you guys have going on down there?
Hey, good morning. Yeah, I've had some a little bit of technical difficulty. I'll keep this short and brief. Again, like she said, I'm David Jordan. I am the Pathfinder representative down here in the North Carolina area. Work with 18th Airborne Corps, 82nd Airborne Division, and all separate brigades here on the Fort Bragg area. North Carolina. I recently reached out to the National Guard, so we should be creating a partnership with them. Right now we have 4 projects going on in our area, and I'll leave that short right there. I think I can go in depth on the projects at another meeting or a later date. Thank you.
So within the past year and a half, these are just some of our accomplishments within the Pathfinder program that, milestones that we've hit. So actually launching the program itself, launching the Catalyst software, We have different spaces called maker spaces within this program, one of them being down at Fort Bragg, which we had the grand opening for last week, another one being the Torch, which we actually just had the grand opening here this past Wednesday, so 2 days ago, which we'll have Jared talk about here in a bit. And we'll discuss kind of the concept of that here shortly. We have quite a few Pathfinder projects that we've kicked off in our different regions. In West Virginia, we had 2 C-level projects that have concluded. We have a third one that just started, and we're looking to launch at least 1 to 2 pilot projects, which I'll explain what that means here in a minute. And then lastly, we have a project that concluded its pilot phase, which is one of the longer project phases of the 2 that we have. And that project, the solution concept was successfully transitioned to a DEVCOM center at its conclusion. So that's a pretty big win for not just for us, but for soldiers in the Army as well. Okay, so like I had mentioned previously, one element to this program is something called makerspaces. So the idea behind that is we have these facilities that are set up at Fort Campbell, Fort Bragg, Fort Stewart will be having one opening in the next couple months, and in West Virginia here at our CMI2 headquarters. Basically what these spaces are for, 3 of the 4 spaces have different types of equipment, 3D printing, CNC milling, additive subtractive manufacturing, stuff of that nature. A soldier can come in at any point, anytime. The space is staffed by a CMI2 employee, a manager for that space. If they have a problem that they've identified and, it's something that might be physically like equipment based, they can go into the facility, speak with the makerspace manager about what they feel like a solution concept could look like, and then physically actually create that themselves after being taught how to utilize the equipment. One good example of this that we do like to utilize, down at Fort Campbell, there was a soldier that came in after he had done some training in the field, and, he had a NVG mount. There was something kind of funky with it that just wasn't working for him. And so he said, if I could just adjust it, in this particular XYZ fashion, it would work so much better. It'd be so much more efficient. So our makerspace manager we have down at Fort Campbell was able to assist him with 3D printing a new NVG mount that worked the way he wanted it to. And it ended up working so well, he ended up 3D printing them for his entire platoon. So that's kind of the concept of, giving soldiers the ability to, have that direct innovation and being able to foster that just directly. That's what success looks like for us within those spaces. So like I said, we have 4 spaces total. One is down at Fort Campbell, which we opened last summer. Then we have the Fort Bragg space, the Airborne Innovation Lab, which opened mid last week. Then there's the Marne Innovation Lab down at Fort Stewart, which will be having its grand opening early next year. And then the Tactical Operations related to Cybersecurity Hub, which is the cybersecurity focused makerspace that we have here in West Virginia. So I think I got a little bit ahead of myself there. So the Applied Tactical Innovation Center, that's the name of the Fort Campbell makerspace that we have, and listed there are just some of the capabilities of that space. And like I said, even if a soldier is, TDY, may not actually belong to Fort Campbell, if they're on Fort Campbell and, want to explore that space, they're more than welcome to. All right, and this is the slide here about the Torch. We do have a separate briefing about the Torch and some of its particular capabilities, which once this presentation concludes, we'll have Jared Lemons, who's our Cybersecurity Innovation Chief, give the briefing on that. So this slide deck is slightly dated. So the Airborne Innovation Lab, with the 82nd down at Fort Bragg, that did open mid last week, and the space down at Fort Stewart will open early next year. Okay, so the next few slides are just some examples of some of the Pathfinder projects that we have ongoing. I might flip through a couple of these. I would like to speak more about the West Virginia ones, since those are the ones from my region. They do have a cybersecurity focus, and then I'll have David, if he'd like to jump in with any ones that pop out from North Carolina or add anything that may not be listed here, then he can do so as well. I do want to speak about this though. So the Soldier Assistive Bionic Exosuit for Resupply, or the SABRE project, was the first Pathfinder project that was launched early on last year. And basically what this is a exoskeleton that a soldier can wear to assist them with not rounding their back when they're lifting artillery rounds, and therefore not injuring themselves. This is the Pathfinder project that has successfully transitioned to Soldier Center. So this project started as a seed level project. It lasted about 6 months in length. And I'll just take a pause here to kind of explain this. When it comes to Pathfinder projects, there's two different project types. There's a seed project, which is, maximum 6 months in length, has a lesser funding cap to it. And then at the end of the project, the solution is more of a proof of concept, more so than an actual prototype. When it comes to a pilot level project, however, those can be a year to, I think I've seen as long as 15 months in length. They're a bit more in depth. And at the end of the project, which does have an increased funding cap, there is a prototype that is developed. And once the pilot project concludes, that's when we're looking to transition that technology, that solution concept, whatever it might be, that widget, to, possibly a DEVCOM center or some other entity within the Army or DoD that would adopt that and then reintegrate it back into the Army. So like I said, with Sabre, that was adopted by Soldier Center and successfully transitioned to Soldier Center at the conclusion of the pilot project. And so Advanced Dynamic Spectrum Radio, that is another project. I believe it's about to launch into its pilot phase, or it's already in its pilot phase at this point. Also out of Fort Campbell. Just another project that, there was a soldier identified problem, and this was a solution concept that was developed in order to solve it. So malicious device detection, this was the first project that came out of the West Virginia region when the MOA was put in place to work with the West Virginia National Guard late last year. So the Army Interagency Training and Education Center facility that I had mentioned at the beginning of the brief, or when I first started presenting, there are two battalions that fall below that center. One is the Critical Infrastructure Protection Battalion. The other is the CBRNI, so the Chemical, Biological, Radiological Battalion. So this problem set was brought to the Pathfinder program from the SIP Battalion, which houses all of those different, HQDA, DHS, DISA, mission assurance teams. So these teams, especially the DISA team, a lot of their primary focus is on, cybersecurity, securing the network, stuff of that nature, when they go and assess different assets for these stakeholders. So that being said, there was a need identified for a way that phones, laptops, stuff of that nature that are received by soldiers can be scanned before being placed onto a network to ensure that there are no malicious components that may have been added to that device. It might have shipped from a friendly country, but if it made a detour, into an adversarial country, just part of the shipping path, just making sure that nothing may have been inserted into that piece of tech before being placed onto a network. So that's where malicious device detection project came in. We partnered with Marshall University out of West Virginia. And what these folks did is they created an algorithm and kind of a proof of concept of how there's a device that they're working on creating, or they will be in their pilot phase of this project, to plug into a device and be able to scan to see if there are any components that are considered malicious, thereby preventing folks from placing stuff on the network if there's, items in the tech that should not be there. So this is the other project that's come out of West Virginia. The Adjutant General of the West Virginia National Guard, his priorities are, top priority is cybersecurity and all things related to cyber. So both of the first two projects that came out of West Virginia did have a cybersecurity type focus. So this actually was brought to us by the director of the West Virginia Military Authority. We were told that there was a problem identified where, even though folks in the West Virginia National Guard can be tracked by, what unit they belong to, what MOS they may have, what PME, what type of military education they may have received, that doesn't necessarily account for, if it's a drill status guardsman that only goes to drill once a month, that doesn't necessarily account for, what they might do for their work Monday to Friday, what degrees they may have, if they're an EMT or a fireman, stuff of that nature. So that being said, there was a solution concept developed by the West Virginia University Institute of Technology to build a database where soldiers can input information about, what their civilian skill sets may be, what their civilian work history might be, what their civilian education, certifications, stuff of that nature may be. One of the primary focus areas that this project looked at was to kind of create a repository and specifically identify if folks in their civilian sector jobs had cybersecurity related skills. That way, if there is a mission set that's passed down from National Guard Bureau or another higher headquarters to the West Virginia National Guard, leadership will be able to go into this database, search for different skill sets, even if it's not something that a soldier has been trained for, by the Army. If they have a degree in, digital forensics or something that could be useful for a mission set, that could be very useful for a commander in order to assign folks to different mission sets. Okay, well, that's the conclusion of my portion of the brief.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Defense Technology Talks, hosted by the North Carolina Defense Technology Transition Office, or DEFTECH. The views expressed in this broadcast are solely those of the individual contributors. As indicated, DEFTECH does not take responsibility for those statements or opinions and accepts no responsibility or liability for any inaccuracy or omissions reported during this program. The content and interviews are fair use for instructional purposes and to build awareness for the North Carolina innovation ecosystem. The full version of this presentation has been uploaded to our Mobilize platform. Mobilize is just another free service provided to you to access more national security and business collaboration opportunities. You can sign up for more information at deftech.nc.gov. Join us soon for the next podcast coming to a platform near you. DEFTECH is a subsidiary of the North Carolina Military Business Center and receives its support from Fayetteville Technical Community College.